This is Dr. Trevor Dixon with the JAHJAH Foundation, Jamaicans Abroad Helping Jamaicans at Home. And we thought it was important to make this video for physicians and frontliners who are operating during COVID-19 pandemic. And this would apply to any pandemic. There's certain protective equipment that one needs to wear. But beyond that, we should be able to function as regular physicians and do what we were trained to do, which is save lives. We had a very interesting incident in Jamaica where a young lady presented to the hospital, and because of the hysteria with COVID-19, she didn't get the standard of care which she should have gotten, and it turned out that she wasn't COVID-19 positive. So, I mean, if the physicians had just functioned how they should be with the right PPE, she probably would have had a better outcome. I also want to dedicate this video to Dr. James Mahoney, otherwise referred to as Charlie Mahoney, from SUNY Downstate and Kings County Medical Center. He was a frontline physician, intensivist, who was on the front line, and despite having his PPE on, he contracted coronavirus and he lost his life. I think he's to be commended because he put his patients first, and obviously he paid the ultimate sacrifice, which is his life. But knowing Dr. Mahoney, I think that he couldn't have had it any other way. He gave his life for over 30 years. He gave his life to his patients. And it's no surprise that in COVID-19, he stepped up and he did his best he could do for his patients, and it ultimately cost his life. So this message is to physicians, not just in Jamaica, but anywhere in the world, in America also, where they're fear about seeing COVID-19 patients. It's okay to be fearful. I think we're all on the front line. We're all a little bit fearful. However, we don't let that fear becomes or gets the best of us to the point where we can't take care of patients. I think ultimately we've been trained to take care of patients. We've taken an oath, and I think we should follow through in that oath. Thank you. This is Dr. Dixon from the JAHJAH Foundation.
Hi everyone, my name is Molly. I'm one of the emergency medicine residents. We had a really interesting case come in the other night. It was a patient complaining of palpitations. We were able to do a point of care ultrasound at the bedside when he first came in, and we found that he had fluid surrounding his heart. At first his vital signs were okay, but as the night progressed, his vital signs became worse and worse. We were able to continue to ultrasound him throughout the evening and see that he had more and more fluid surrounding his heart. He became unstable because of the fluid surrounding his heart, and we realized we needed to actually take the fluid away from his heart. He was too unstable to be transferred to another facility, so we called our trauma surgeons, and I think within about 5 minutes of Dr. Stone receiving the phone call, he was down in the emergency department in one of the resuscitation bays, seeing and evaluating the patient. The patient was able to go up to the operating room, have the fluid removed from his heart, and ended up having a really good outcome. And I think that was mostly due to the fact that we were able to ultrasound him early, repeatedly ultrasound him throughout the evening to see how he was progressing, and then also because there was really good communication between our trauma surgeons and the emergency department that ultimately led to him getting to the operating room quickly.
Thank you, Doc.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stone, the director of the SICU, and I wanted to just go through some fine points of a story that went well. We had a patient come in several days ago who presented with pericardial tamponade. My understanding, this patient had 2 episodes of hypotension down to systolic of 50s. What was great about the case is that the ED team was on it quite readily. They resuscitated the patient to where he was metastable. At that time, they called me, and this emphasizes the importance of quick communication between different departments, different teams. They called me, and I believe I came down within the next 3 to 5 minutes. And we were able to keep the patient stabilized, and then I, in turn, called the cardiology department, and they responded readily, and we took this patient to the OR for a TAP to relieve his cardiac tamponade, and the patient did well. The reason I'm telling you about this case is, again, to underscore the importance of seamless and timely communication. Possibly the outcome could have went differently if we had a lot of obstacles to the different teams communicating.
Now, COVID was an issue at one point with this patient, right? So how do you feel about COVID in these times? Yeah.
So I think that what we're learning about COVID is that COVID is everywhere. And all the experts and those of you who work in healthcare know you can present asymptomatic. And I think that should not deter us from doing what we've already learned pre-COVID of taking care of the patients. The thing is that we just need to protect ourselves. And we learned this in different times. I'm old enough to remember when HIV was a big deal. And it's still out there, but we protect ourselves, and the same thing with COVID. So what we did with this patient, everybody had PPE on, including I had my N95 mask, which I tend to wear often now.
So besides the mask that you have, which is the N95, is there any more elaborate things that you need to wear, or is it just basic stuff?
So, like with any other type of procedure, or if you guys have seen me down in trauma bay, you should have PPE that covers your eyes and sort of splash and fluid. And the proper other thing is also to have a gown and gloves on, just in case you get any of that on. So the same PPE that you should be wearing for any trauma resuscitation, you should be wearing for patients who potentially could be COVID.
So we're not talking any elaborate kind of PPEs. This is just basic stuff.
It's nothing new. Okay. Nothing new. I would say the only thing that's different is the N95 mask, because of the threat of aerosolized viral particles or such, and pluming or something like that. And then I would add to that, another difference is if you have a patient who is able to, they probably should be wearing a mask anyway as well, because you're protecting yourself from the patient as well. So that would be a little bit different in other types of PPE or something. You don't get the patient to wear a mask, but in this environment, the patient should wear a mask if they are able to do so, not intubated or something like that.
Otherwise than that, it's just business as usual.
Business as usual. You got to be careful not to let COVID distract you from taking care of patients the way you've done pre-COVID.
All right, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Jenny Chang. I'm one of the resident physicians working with Dr. Dixon. So I think the moral of the story out of all of this is that the patient comes first, no matter what. I know working in COVID times, it's hard times, and we worry about PPE and everything, but as long as you gown up, you go in and you think about how to serve the patient first. There's no excuse. We all have to do our part, and as healthcare providers, we took an oath that no matter what, the patient comes first.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Molly Burke, a PGY4 from Jacoby Hospital.
Hello, good morning. I'm Dr. Muhammad, and I'm a third-year resident at Jacoby.
So the other night we had a very interesting case with Dr. Dixon. We had a gentleman who was 42 years old, and he was coming in for some palpitations and some shortness of breath that was worse when he was walking around. These symptoms in this patient were particularly concerning because he had had a history of a PE. So we decided to do an ultrasound of this patient, and we were actually looking for McConnell sign, but what we found was a little bit more concerning, which was some fluid around the heart or pericardial effusion.
Can you show us that?
So this is the heart right here, and this fluid around it is actually not supposed to be there. Normally it's a potential space without anything in it. So it's unclear what that fluid was at the time of diagnosis. The other thing that is concerning on the ultrasound is you can see the right ventricle here, and he had some diastolic collapse. So the fluid was pushing and basically cutting off preload for this patient or forward flow of the blood.
So what was interesting about this particular case?
So this guy initially came in and his blood pressure was actually a little bit elevated. It was like 130s, systolics over 80s, and his heart rate was probably 80s, 90s.
Now, was that good? That was a good thing, right?
Which is a good thing because you don't want vital sign abnormalities in somebody with fluid around their heart. Now, what happened later was this guy ended up becoming tachycardic to like 130, and he dropped his blood pressures to 90s systolic. So at that point, we made the decision to re-ultrasound him, and we had found that there was more fluid accumulation around the heart, which is very concerning because that happened within like a 2-3 hour period.
So at that point, we would consider transferring him, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just one additional thing I want to point out, the importance of point of care ultrasound, especially doing it multiple times. Initially, we did this looking for signs of right ventricular strain, which he does have, not from the pulmonary embolism, but rather from an effusion. When the clinical situation changed and he became more tachycardic, it was important that at that point we recognized that we had to do a repeat ultrasound. So we did that. This time the effusion was a lot bigger, and now there's a lot more right ventricular strain, which means that we had to take action. Action for us was getting him to a center where there's a cardiothoracic surgeon and a cardiologist there at all time. We're trying to do that, and unfortunately, because of COVID, this patient did not have a result yet. It's kind of just logistically made it harder to transfer the patient in a more timely way. So we had to take action. We had to kind of escalate this and do what we thought was right. So what we thought was right at that point is talk to our trauma surgeon who had some...
So basically keep the patient in-house.
Exactly, especially since he was becoming more tachycardic, intermittently hypotensive.
So basically unstable.
Exactly. We were able to preload him. We gave him some fluids, got his blood pressure back up, but we're still concerned that he might not be 100% stable for transfer. Luckily, we were able to get the surgeon on board to calm down. We called him directly. He was extremely responsive. He came within 5 minutes. He was at bedside. We showed him the ultrasound images, and of course, he trusts our ultrasound images. And from that point on, within 10 minutes, this patient was in the operating room. He called the cardiologist. They were at bedside in the OR performing the procedure, the life-saving procedure.
Okay, so I guess the moral of the story is that if patients are unstable, transfer is really not an option.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are afraid of basically doing their job in the time of coronavirus, and I think that we have a job to do. If you show up to work, then you got to do your job, and for this guy, doing the job meant getting him to a place that was the safest possible solution for him. Yes, as ER physicians, we could have drained this fluid, but he wasn't at the point where he needed an emergent pericardiocentesis, basically taking a needle into that fluid and draining it. So our options were we need an interventional cardiologist to put a drain in, or the other option is having a cardiothoracic surgeon put something called a window in, which basically is another way of saying putting a drain in. And that's very important for this patient because we need to know why he had this effusion. So for him, the initial option was sending him to an interventional cardiologist, but because the test results were delayed in getting back for the coronavirus, he actually during that time became unstable. So at that point we were like, okay, let's call our surgeons to maybe for them to put the drain in here. As opposed to transferring someplace that would have taken 10-20 minutes for him to get to another hospital with EMS personnel that aren't they can't do this type of procedure. So it would have been a very unsafe transfer. But luckily this guy had a pretty good outcome. He ended up going to the OR. They held him there until one of our cardiologists came in and put in the drain themselves, and they got back like 500 cc's of fluid, which is a half a liter of fluid.
And another good part of the story is that, again, with most of these cases, the patient ended up being COVID negative, right?
Yeah, he actually got tested twice. They swabbed him twice. We swabbed him down in the ER. He was negative. And then they swabbed him again later that day. Again, negative.
So it goes to show, just do your job, and everything will always work out.
And if you have one of two options. You either show up for work or you don't show up for work. If you're going to show up for work, just do your job.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dr. Trevor Dixon. I'm going to be explaining to you today the use of PPEs and what exactly is a PPE. A PPE is basically just personal protective equipment. And some people believe that it's maybe some extraordinary piece of equipment, but it's basically a gown, simple gown, yellow or blue. This is actually a sterile gown, but for COVID patients, you don't actually need a sterile gown. Any of these gowns will do. Face shield or goggles and an N95 mask. So I think every hospital in this day and age should stock all these equipments, and that's basically what you need for a PPE protection. So this N95 mask, as you can see, it looks like a duck mask. I'm going to put it over my head, and there's 2 strings here. I'll put the head. Keep my glasses on. One string goes up, another string goes down. Glasses on. Make sure press there's a wire at the top over the nose bridge. Secure it. Mask is on. This is a facial shield. These can be made of, as you know, people are making them on 3D printers now. That's my face shield. And a gown. Simple gown. So that's what the PPE is for coronavirus. Nothing fancy, so I think any physician should be able to gown up properly, feel safe enough to treat a patient who they suspect have COVID-19. Thank you for your time.